Thank you very much. Thank you. Hello everyone. It's really nice to be back at Camp Digital. So some of you may have seen my 300-second lightning talk that I did last year about feeling stuck in the middle of a creative career. And then obviously I was very kindly invited to come back and to expand on that this year. So here we are. But before we get into it, for those of you who didn't see my talk last year, I'm just going to start with a quick disclaimer. So I am not a psychologist, I am not an economist, I am not a career coach, I'm really selling myself here. I am a designer and a creative director, just a bit of promo here. I run my own creative practice, so I work across branding and design, strategy, campaigns, and I help lots of different organisations figure out what it is they want to say, how they're going to go about saying it, and then I help to bring a team around that and work as a creative director and bring that to life in all its kind of colourful visual glory. So, why am I talking to you about mid-career stuff, and more importantly, why on earth should you listen to me? Well, I think that there's something that we can learn from the creative process itself, like the way that artists and designers and makers move through uncertainty, that I think is really useful when it comes to navigating the middle bit of a career. And whilst I am not a career expert, I am someone who is very much kind of like in the creative process all the time. I've been doing this for like 15 years as a creative career. And more importantly, I am someone who is very much in the middle right now, and I've been taking notes along the way. So for the next 30 minutes, I'm going to take some of the conversations that I've had with myself and that I've had in private with other people, and I'm going to just say them out loud to this lovely room full of strangers and see what you all think and what could possibly go wrong. So I'll start by defining what I mean by the middle. So let's do some really simple maths, just make it easy for me. If the average person starts full-time work at around the age of 21 and then retires at 66, that gives you a 45-year career span. If we then split that into thirds, the middle lands somewhere between the ages of 36 and 50. Now that is not a hard boundary, because the middle can obviously land at very different times for different people, especially now when people start careers later in life or they do career changes, and when really the whole sort of landscape shape of work is shifting. This is a total sidebar and I'll probably lose track of where I am in this talk, but when I was Googling an image to use in this presentation for this slide, I searched like workplaces in the future, and 90% of the images were a picture of a robot that looked just like this, that was sat at a desktop, and it kind of made me laugh that our vision of the future is basically we're just going to let our AI have the same chronic back pain problems that we all have. So I know it's really lame, so I apologise for that. But anyway, sorry, I've totally procrastinated there. So yeah, if you are not in that age bracket of 36 to 50, but what I'm about to share with you resonates, then you don't need to panic because you are in the right place. So just to do a quick check of the room, how many of you in here have had one or more of these thoughts about your job or career in the last 6 to 12 months? And you don't have to show your hands if your colleagues and your managers are in the room with you, but feel free, like, you know, you don't have to. If any of that sounds familiar to you, you know, this idea of like waking up every day with dread, or that you feel like you're doing really well on paper but something just isn't quite right, or that you're tired all the time and you just feel like something's got to give, something's got to change, you are not alone in that. I have certainly experienced one, two, or all of those things in recent years, and I found myself asking myself, what is it that's actually going on when we experience these feelings, and why does it often seem to land in the middle of our career? and first of all, hint, it's not just you and it's not a new thing. This is a tale as old as time. People for centuries have been getting lost in the middle of life and grappling with like the meaning of life. But what is different is the context that we're doing it in right now. So since the start of the pandemic, 4 million people in the UK have changed their career, and 1 in 10 people have changed careers in the last decade. I also think that this research from St James's Place is quite interesting, in that it says that the most dissatisfied people with work right now are Gen Xers and millennials, who coincidentally are probably in the sort of beginning of the middle of the middle, or the end of the middle of their careers. And I think that what this tells us is that this is a universal feeling. These feelings are shared, but maybe the conditions that are shaping them aren't always the same. And there isn't always just one reason why we feel that way. More likely, there are several things that are going on at once. And some of those things are to do with internal influences. So they're very personal to us, you know, like how we think, what we value, what we expect of ourselves, you know, our own personal ambitions. And there are also external influences as well. There are actually quite a lot of external influences when you write them down. You know, the systems that we're working in, the expectation that's put on us by others. And right now we're navigating a lot of change in terms of like huge shifts in technology, AI, economic instability, changes in the global order. Sorry, am I bumming everyone out? But there are a lot of these external influences sort of shape the environment around us, and then, you know, all the internal influences that go on for us is what shapes how we experience it. And something that I noticed in myself is that even when I can intellectually comprehend that both the internal and external forces are at play, I sometimes still treat that discomfort, that sort of restlessness, that anxiety, that frustration as a personal failure to handle it all. But when so many of these forces that are shaping our careers, shaping our lives, come from outside of us, why do we assume that the solution has to come entirely from within us as well? And just to kind of put that into some context of some films that I like, you know, like if you look at kind of stories and films, like Frodo had Gandalf to help him navigate the middle, and Luke had Yoda, and it kind of got me thinking, like, what do I have? What do we have? I feel like I have podcasts, which kind of sucks, doesn't it, in that comparison? And I'm sure I don't have to tell anyone in this room that not one podcast or one person can fix an entire system, because I do think that a lot of what we experience in the mid-career is actually structural. And I'll be honest, I feel like I noticed this quite early on in my working life. From 16 to 21, I used to work weekends and holidays and stuff as a sales advisor in a large high street retailer. I won't say the name, shouldn't get the free advertising. But it was mostly women who worked in this store, and some of those women were mothers. And now, like a lot of students, you know, I was desperate for overtime because, you know, at uni I needed to keep myself in printing credits and cheap beer. But it was the standard going that, and just sort of everybody kind of generally knew that the working mothers weren't going to take on any extra overtime. And when they talked about it, it was really simple. They knew that if they worked more, they'd lose their benefits. And once they paid for childcare and travel to work, they'd actually be worse off. So they used to turn it down, and I'll be honest, absolutely, I would 100% do the same. It makes absolute perfect sense. And then I noticed the same thing happened when I actually entered the working world of design, and I started working in design agencies. The women who I was working with, they'd come back from maternity leave, you know, wanting to stay in their careers, wanting to keep a foot on the ladder, as we're often told we need to do. And they realised that they were effectively paying to be in work. Not just in terms financially, having to pay for childcare and travel, but also paying with time and energy and other resources as well. And I've been in this industry, in the creative industries, for 15 years now, and over that time I've watched more and more women go freelance and start working for themselves and set up businesses, and myself is included. And that's not because it was always the dream. I wasn't born with like this like unbelievable burning entrepreneurial spirit, but it was because we were kind of pushed out. Women were pushed out, and especially I noticed that the mothers who I was working with, and disclosure, I'm not a mum myself, but you know, I still see it now. They were being pushed out. The problem wasn't them or their desire to work or anything like that. It was just that the jobs and the workplace and the system that they were working in just wasn't designed with them in mind. And I do believe that if you want to get an early warning of where a society or a system is failing, just watch how it treats its mothers and see how they're responding, because they are the canaries in the coal mine. And I think now, bringing it up to the present day, I think more and more people, more and more of us are realising now that the idea of work that we were raised with, the idea of a career that we were raised with, which was shaped by that kind of like industrial era thinking, which was then carried through into corporate culture, it just doesn't work for so many people now, and it's kind of broken, and I think it's also broken a lot of people as well. And then to add another layer on top of that, we've inherited this very narrow idea of what success should look like, what a successful career should look like. And a lot of that is built around this idea of constant productivity, and I'm trying to resist doing a Keir Starmer impression here, like productivity, and you know, long hours and having that really like visible achievement. It's your name on the plaque, it's your name on the trophy, all this kind of stuff, and also like financial reward. And if your life or your priorities don't fit that model, it has an impact on your career, and we can internalise that as a kind of feeling of failure, or I certainly do. But it's not a failure. It's a friction between real life and a system that wasn't built for everyone, and it wasn't built for the lives that most of us live now. And I've seen this particularly in my own industry, how limiting this kind of model can be on creative work. It might lead to more work, but it doesn't necessarily lead to better work. What it often ends up doing is it pulls people into a more mechanical way of working, which I just don't think is conducive with creativity, you know, where experimentation starts to feel really risky and output becomes the priority at the expense of exploration. But I think a really big part of being human is wanting to explore and wanting to be creative, and I think a lot of people really feel that when they get to the middle of their careers, because that desire to be creative and do creative work, it doesn't disappear in midlife or in mid-career. Even if you, like me, you've done it for a job, it just gets harder to access because the systems and sort of responsibilities of midlife are sort of weighing down on us and kind of holding us back. And there is a reason that this idea of like a mid-career or a midlife crisis exists. The word midlife crisis was actually first identified by a Canadian psychoanalyst called Elliot Jacks in the 1960s, and he studied creative people. So he studied, you know, artists, designers, writers, composers, and what he noticed was a pattern. So people were arriving in their late 30s and they were starting to question like the meaning of life. They were starting to ask like, what direction am I going in? They were questioning like their own mortality. They were faced with their mortality, and if I'm entirely honest, that can just be me on a Wednesday afternoon sometimes. But then what's really interesting is following this sort of like middle period that they went through, he noted that a lot of those people, a lot of those creatives would then go on to produce their best work, or at least their most fulfilling work. So it's almost like with that middle wobble, almost acting as like a catalyst for something, or maybe the middle was just that kind of pause, that area where they could start to transition and change and grow. So I think that maybe there is like quite a lot to learn from studying creatives or looking at creatives. And especially the creative process as well as sort of this model for how we can like guide ourselves through the middle. I'm sure like everyone in this room, whether you do a creative job or not, has made something at some point. So like, you know, whether you've made like a paper mache fruit bowl in your year 9 art class, or you've been working on like a novel for the last 10 years, I'm sure that all of you are familiar with the creative process, whether you do it every day or, you know, you dip your toes in it every now and then. And so I'm sure you'll recognise this kind of like process. You'll know that there is like this huge gap between like, I have an idea, and then holding that finished thing in your hand. And that gap in the middle feels disgusting. It feels awful. It feels like doubt, it feels like confusion, it feels like you're starting stuff and then it goes wrong, and then there's like all the procrastination in the world. And you know, it feels like you're often saying like, this isn't working, and it's the bit where you kind of want to give up and give in because you just think, I'm never gonna get through this. But that gap isn't a failure to be creative, it is the actual creative process. And I think that mid-career feels very similar to that sort of feeling that we get in the creative process. You know, we kind of start on our careers, if we've been lucky enough to do degrees, etc., and we sort of think, you know, we've got an idea of what a career could look like, or we fantasize about what a career could look like, and then we move through it and we build things and we adjust things, and then you find yourself in the middle, where it feels like you can't go back, but you can't quite see yet how things are going to turn out, and it feels itchy, it feels awful, it feels uncomfortable. And I think that's because we've been trained to sort of read this feeling of discomfort as a failure, and it's actually not. It's actually part of the creative process. So when you actually look at the creative process, in reality, it is not this sort of upward trajectory of, I've got this idea and it's all sunshine and rainbows from there right through to the finish line. You know, it's a lot more squiggly, it's a lot more messy. It's almost kind of like the shape that I've settled on is this infinity loop, and then this is, again, sidetrack, completely unrelated, but as I was doing this, I was just like, oh my god, it looks like pasta, so I'm just going to put it in. It's got absolutely no relevance whatsoever, but I'm just going to keep it on the screen because it just visually really satisfied me. So yeah, I think that, you know, careers are becoming more kind of like that creative process where it isn't just this upward trajectory that we were promised, it is sort of more like this kind of like figure of eight, this kind of this loop, because careers are changing, we are living longer, we're definitely expected to work later, hopefully that's because of good health and things like that. And you know, I think a lot of us are already kind of acknowledging that we're going to have multiple careers in our lifetime, not just one. I think that idea of, you know, you have a job for life is pretty much in the ground. And I think what we need is a different kind of mental model, like a way of thinking about this, one that acknowledges the different stages of growth. So rather than it being this constant upward trajectory, it's the stages of growth, but then the contraction, and then the bit in the middle where you might reset, or you might pause, you might take time out from work, and then what it's like to come back and regrow again. And that sort of just continues on and on. And with this kind of model, I think the skill in the middle isn't choosing the perfect path or the right ladder to climb. It's about building a career that is baggy enough for you to grow in, because in the middle, I think what you need most is space and time, very much like the middle of the creative process. I'm sure anyone who's ever had to work with a creative can recognise that when they're like, I need more time. It's very much part of the creative process. You know, and the reason that you need that space and that time is because you need to experiment, you need to test, you need to stretch, and you need to figure out exactly what it is that like fits you. So what's going to help? Just give me one thing, Jane, is what I hear you cry. It's just like, give me one thing that I can take away today and I can just like start thinking about it and start doing something with it. Well, right now we're in this mix of, you know, we've got this like structural pressure, we've got this sort of personal uncertainty and this changing shape model of work. So how do we actually start to move through it? And those of you who came to my talk last year might remember that I talked about this idea of like, do you need a mid-career MOT? I still think that there's potential for that to be like a national programme. If anyone wants to start that or pitch that or whatever, I'm interested. I feel like I still need it. This is how that kind of looked at the end of the, that I put at the end of the talk. I kind of summarised it. So I kind of split the idea that we do this MOT based on like purpose, people and perspective. You know, like what's your unique mix of experience, values and skills, you know, tapping into your network and then like thinking about how you measure impact and success. But the more I've thought about it, if I had to just pick like one thing to focus on first, I think I've realised that the really big influence on me in navigating my career and navigating through the middle has actually been people, and people have an impact on how you feel and view your purpose, and also they influence your perspective as well. So it's not a incredible large budgeted project, it's not winning like a dream client, the most important thing is the relationships that I have and that I've built. And when I talk about relationships, I'm not talking about like, you know, that kind of like LinkedIn, like networking thing where it's like, what jobs can you do for me, favours, etc., etc. I mean, like, as cheesy as it sounds, I mean just friendships, like just having friends. You know, the people who you feel like you can go to get their perspective, who will be like honest with you, fair, but honest with you, who'll tell you the truth and who will help you see what you can't see, and also who you can share resources with and experiences with, because some of the biggest shifts in my own thinking that I've seen as I've sort of arrived in the middle of my career has come from the conversations that I've had with my friends, and you know, just thinking out loud with people, which is exactly what I'm doing with you right now. In a way, like we're just thinking out loud. I'm sure like that's kind of a lot of what today is just us all thinking out loud. And of course it goes both ways, because it's not just about what you can take from people, it's also about what you can give back to people, what you can give back to your friends, what you can give back to your network, who you can support and who you can make time for. And again, those of you who came to my talk last year, I've recycled this quote because I think it still hits, I think it's still good. It's, no being is purely individual. Each life form is less like an individual warrior and more like a tiny universe. And I love that because it breaks this idea that we're meant to do this alone, that like I talked about earlier, that it's like my problem to solve, it's your problem to solve and figure out how you're going to get through this. Because you're not this kind of lone warrior, you're not this lone figure, and you're never building a career completely in isolation, even if you're someone like me who's kind of gone off and done their own thing. Like, it's not, I'm not here entirely because of me. There are lots of people who've brought me to where I am today. And you are, in fact, this whole ecosystem of relationships and collaborations and conversations and influences and wider learning that you've done. And if I can go back to sort of the women that I was talking about, the women that I've worked alongside from being 16 years old, these women, they weren't just surviving a bad system on their own. Like, they shared information, like all the women that knew what they were doing. Everybody, like if someone new started, it'd be like, this is what we do. They were sharing resources, they talked to each other. They were finding ways through with each other within an unequal system. And that is what got them through. And at the start, I shared some of these thoughts that I think people might feel when they get in the middle of their careers. But there was one that I didn't put on there, but I will share with you now, and it's probably the one that kind of lands hardest for me. And it's, if I'm not this job, then who am I? I've definitely felt that. I think that's a really common experience with people who are lucky enough to have a creative career or lucky enough to do something that like fulfills them and that they find, you know, it's really is like a part of who you are. But if you aren't this job, you're still everything you've learned from this job, you're still everything you've built, and you're still every relationship that you've invested in. And I think just going back to that universe thing, if we sort of think of ourselves as these like tiny universes, then the job that you have right now is just one part of sort of this wider universe of you, sort of the wider part of your career, your life. It's not the whole thing. And I think when we frame it that way, or when we think about it that way, it kind of makes it feel more manageable to and you feel more open to change and adjusting and experimenting and exploring something different. And so I'll leave you with these closing thoughts. The middle of your career gives you something that is very useful. It gives you perspective. You can look back on what shaped you, and you can decide what worked, what didn't, what to keep and what to let go of. Maybe that might include defining how you define what a successful career looks like, what a happy life looks like, what a happy career looks like. And of course, that can always be changing. Because I don't think most of us actually want to be a lone warrior, hell-bent on like our own individual success and like accumulating our own individual wealth. I think most of us, or I'd like to think most of us anyway, you know, what we really want is a career that is baggy enough to hold a full life and all the ups and downs that brings. And I think we want people around us who are going to help us carry that. So maybe being in the middle isn't actually a sign that you've failed. To arrive at a certain point in your career or at a certain wage or a certain job title, and maybe it's not even a problem to solve. Maybe it's just an experience, it's just part of life that's there to be shared with other people who are also going through it with you too. Thank you.
Whatever you want to.
If anyone's got any questions at all.
There's hands up everywhere.
Yes.
You have a mic?
We don't have a roving mic now, so
shout.
Okay.
We'll pick you up.
I was struck by your cutting off the career at age 66. I'm 73, and I'm still working. And I'm wondering, and I was wondering if you're aware of the efforts to combat ageism, especially in technology, and the increasing numbers of people who want to continue working beyond the standard retirement age, and consider themselves useful and productive and valuable. And
absolutely, I think that's part of it. I'll be honest, that is easy maths for me because I can divide 45 by 3. But that's part of it. Is that, you know, work is changing. I think that, like, I look at sort of even in my own industry when I first entered, and it was people would leave at that age, but now people are working well beyond, especially with careers where, you know, it's not physically sort of back-breaking work necessarily. You can carry on doing that, and I think that the idea of how I see it working is, I think that rather than it sort of being that you have the middle, beginning, and end, and it's sort of, you've got to kind of continually be moving up through that. I think there will be, like, in that kind of sort of shape that I showed you, I think there'll be these like patches of careers, and I think that we'll have different ones, and there'll be a common threads that run through them all. But I absolutely think that I hope that I can carry on doing what I'm doing for a very long time. But do I think it will look like what I'm doing right now? Absolutely not. And I think we have to kind of have that in mind. And it's not just about adapting to like the changes that happen as you get older. I think it's about adapting to like your changing priorities. So for example, I know that there are, again, like you dog walk chat. When you're on the dog walk and you chat, you walk people of all generations. You know, there are people on our dog walk who are in their 70s who are caring for like siblings or maybe really elderly parents or aunts or uncles, and so life has to adjust for it. So I think work should have to adjust for that as well. And I think that rather than seeing this sort of like cliff of after retirement that we're all just building to and then it finishes, I think that it will be a lot more staged, and we will carry on working that way. Yeah, absolutely, I agree with you. I think people will work well beyond 66.
So I'm thinking maybe you could do a little adjustment to your data.
Yeah. I mean, I still hope they give us our state pension before, like,
well,
we're 90.
You can keep working while you're collecting your pension. So.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you.
Hi.
I don't have a question. I just wanted to say thank you for summing up the last 5 years of my life in a 30-second talk. I've been to this conference for 5 years in a row, and that's the first time I've cried in a talk.
Oh, sorry.
So, and I am speaking next, so it's not ideal.
Oh,
I'll try and wrap it up before I get on that podium. So I just wanted to say thank you. It's brilliant.
Oh,
Brilliant.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thank you. Yes.
Hello, can I have a thought?
Of course, yeah.
Okay, so I'm in my 50s and I am probably on about my 4th career. And those baggy moments that you talk about are really hard to find. And I remember a couple of times I just felt so stuck, but I didn't have any capacity to be baggy. And I just did the smallest thing I could do to kind of unlock something. So I taught myself to knit on YouTube because I just had to try something to remind myself that I could do something new and different. So I think and I'm saying this as a build, I think those changes actually can happen in the smallest moments as well as the kind of big penny drop moments.
I agree with you on that, because something, and I was going to put this in my talk actually, is I think there's a reason why we all develop these hobbies as well as we get older. I've got lots of friends who've got into gardening and knitting. I like doing things like that, or crafts, or bird watching, or started using stained glass and things. And I think it's like having that space to experiment. And I sort of wonder if we could take some of the things from that and put that in the workplace, and sort of remove some of the pressure, so there is that kind of space to experiment in the same way that you do in the creative process, because it does tend to be sort of these creative hobbies that people lean towards. I think it would be beneficial, but yeah, I think the system has to change to allow for that, to allow for people to not have all the sort of the pressures on them, but also at the same time, that change takes such a long time. There are things that we can do, like learn to knit and things like that. I do think it gives a sense of satisfaction, but I also think it's because it's allowing your brain to do that middle bit of the creative process in a way that doesn't feel like really high stakes and risky. But yeah, I totally get that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think building on that, seeing yourself as a holistic whole, so you're not, like you were saying, just your job role, you're doing these other things outside of work, and that builds up that universe of who you are. I've really been thinking about that lately, so that was really
brilliant.
Good.
Yeah. I think it is. I think you see. I know I only included down to millennials on that diagram because it was sort of looking particular sort of people who the age range that would fit in the middle, so sort of like boomer through to millennial. But I think that younger generations are picking up on that, that you can't just be work can't maybe be the be all and end all of your self-worth. That you are this whole person, and that you are the sum of all the parts of your life, not just the career path that you've taken. So yeah, I get that completely. Yeah, it's tricky in the dark moments, but you can but in theory, I'm
I think it's also because we all ask people what they, well, particularly somewhere like this, but even when you're with someone in the pub, you ask them what they do, is maybe a few questions in, and so that then defines people's worth rather than, I don't know.
Yeah, and I think there's another layer to it as well that I think particularly impacts maybe women who've chosen to not have if you don't have children, is that if you haven't taken that, then should your job then become something that then you're worthy of, and unpacking that and realising that that's a load of rubbish basically as well. It's you can't just tie your worth to that sort of that job. But yeah, that is the first question you ask, isn't it?
It's like a kind of small talk
thing. Do you work? What do you do? And yeah, I totally get it. Maybe we need a suite, someone design a pack of cards for new questions or something to ask in the pub before you ask someone